Hi everybody, this is Karun Chandhok coming to you straight after the Australian Grand Prix. What a cracking start we've had to the new Formula One season. I mean, coming here to Albert Park in Melbourne is really one of the favourites for pretty much, I think, the whole paddock. It's a great feel, great atmosphere. We're all very close to the beach. You can walk into work. I think that adds a real sort of bounce in your step when you rock up here. And added to that, the intrigue of the new season, what we've seen in pre-season testing, is that going to translate to what we see when it comes to the money end of the weekend on Saturday afternoon and Sunday in qualifying in the race? So there's a really interesting feel. Added to that, this year, the whole paddock, I must say, there's a different atmosphere because this is the first weekend really of the post-Bernie Ecclestone era. Sean Bratches, Chase Carey, Ross Brawn were all here over the weekend, and there was a totally different feel. You know, they in the way that the people involved in the sport and the people involved with the teams and the marketing people and the sponsors. There was definitely a different tone to it all. The effect of that we'll really get to see, I think, only down the line. Right now they seem to be very much in a let's watch and observe sort of phase. You know, there's a lot of things that are happening differently. You know, social media is one side that I think we've already seen, but really the true effects will only come in 2020 when the new agreements come into place. But yeah, certainly, you know, there are much more. There's more openness in terms of the people being able to bring in more guests into the paddock, more people onto the grid. All that kind of stuff is quite different to what it was before. So there are lots of changes, but as I said, I think the true crux of it we'll only see down the line. So let's go to the Grand Prix itself. I mean, is this the big return of Ferrari? What a fantastic race. There are lots of people out there who've been talking about, oh, what a dull race, it wasn't enough overtaking. And I think that's wrong. I really enjoyed the Grand Prix. I think there was a story to it in the way that we used to have. I think people often look at the past with rose-tinted glasses and forget the great days of the late 90s or the early 2000s where we had great racing. You know, we had people look at us, oh, that was fantastic F1, but you'd only have one or two changes of position up at the front, but they were fundamental, they were key changes, and that's what we saw. You know, think of the days with Schumacher and Häkkinen, for example, at Suzuka, or Schumacher-Alonso at Imola, or go back even further, Mansell and Senna at Monaco in '92. You know, I think there's the anticipation of something about to happen is just as intriguing and interesting in a Grand Prix as what's actually happening itself. And I thought this was a great race. You know, I think it's great for Formula One to see Ferrari back. We sort of saw signs of it in pre-season testing. I spent, you know, a bit of time trackside, and we talked about it in our podcast at Motorsport a bit earlier as well. You know, in pre-season testing, the Ferrari looked really, really strong on the long runs especially, and there were some question marks about the ultimate one-lap pace because I think the Merc, we know from last year they could turn the engines up, and when you came through the weekend, that sort of seemed the theme. You know, over one lap in qualifying, the Ferrari a couple tenths shy, and you know, but come the race, when they run a consistent engine mode, when they're all running their sort of race engine modes, the Ferrari seems to be working really well, and in particular they seem less harsh on the tires. You know, Seb was behind Lewis in the dirty air, and yet was able to run around at a pace where he could potentially go faster. Ultimately, Lewis and Mercedes chose to pit, I believe, because the gap to Sebastian, I was watching it, was 1.9 seconds. And then over a two-lap phase, he brought it down. It came to 1.5 and then to 0.9. So he started closing in. And I think Mercedes believed in that stage that they were under threat of an undercut from Sebastian, meaning he would go pit earlier, change to a fresh set of tyres before Lewis and come out of the pits ahead. And they were between, Toto Wolff said to me, his exact words were, we were between a rock and a hard place. Do we bring Lewis in and avoid being undercut by Sebastian, or do we leave him out there and you know, he's complaining about struggling with his tyres. So in the end, I think they should have left him out there for another maybe 3 laps, because then he would have cleared Max Verstappen. And really at that stage, you know, if Seb had come into pit and tried to do the undercut, he would have been stuck behind Max, which in the end is what caught Lewis, or rather cost Lewis and Mercedes the Grand Prix. So yeah, it was nice to see, because we talked about it a lot last year, how Ferrari, there were a lot of moments where strategically they made some calls which proved to be incorrect at the end of the race, but this time they got it absolutely bang on, and it was really, really good to see. I think it's great for F1. We have a real World Championship battle on our hand, where we have one team faster in qualifying, potentially, and another team faster in the races, and I think we're going to see some fantastic racing all through this season. A lot of it's going to depend on updates, though. Can Ferrari keep pushing on with the upgrades and updates to match what Mercedes will do? Because this year the learning curve, listening to people in the paddock, the learning curve is exponential, and the amount of development is just going to go. So we'll have to see how that goes. A couple of things. Well, Red Bull really struggled, but before I go on that, let's talk about Kimi and Bottas. They just didn't look like they had the pace of their 2 teammates. They were running slightly different strategies and running a different race. Valtteri said he was struggling with the ultra softs early on. Thought that he was going to overheat the tires too much, so he didn't really lean on them as much, and he couldn't lean on it. Kimi struggled with understeer, and again he was running a slightly different strategy, so it didn't work for him. But they both did the 2 fastest laps of the race towards the end of the Grand Prix with 2 laps to go. So they both have the potential, and I think they'll be up there as well when they hook it together. Back to Red Bull, what a terrible weekend for them. I mean, Max showed a bit of speed in the race, but you know, they're over a second away in qualifying, and they've really got a lot of work to do, and they know it. You know, Adrian Newey was here, Rob Marshall was here, the 2 chief sort of technical architects, along with Paul Monahan, who's at every Grand Prix as a chief, who looks after the engineering side, and they've really got to get their thinking caps on to try and get it together. We'll see. You know, obviously Renault still have to push on. They talked about going to an older spec MGUK with the ERS unit, so they still have to solve their reliability issues before they get their ultimate peak power sorted. So we'll see if Red Bull can offer the chance, because they've got undoubtedly, or well, not undoubtedly, but arguably the most exciting driver lineup on the grid. So we want to see Max and Daniel right up at the front. The rest of the midfield, just to sort of sum up, Williams, I think, thought they were going to be best of the rest, but then Haas did an amazing job. Romain Grosjean's lap in qualifying was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Kevin Magnussen really struggled this weekend. We'll see if he can get it together. But Grosjean was a standout performance in qualifying. Come the race, though, obviously reliability problems sort of took over, and that cost them a lot of points. But the midfield looks like it's, in qualifying, Haas were up there. They were up and down last year. They had inconsistencies, so we'll have to see if they can iron that out this season. Otherwise, Williams looked like they're ahead of the bunch, followed by Toro Rosso, Force India, Renault sort of nipping at their heels as well. And finally, I think my last point has got to say about Antonio Giovinazzi. I thought he did a fantastic job this weekend. I was a bit surprised with Verline's statement saying he didn't feel he had enough time to train. I mean, I spoke to Checo Perez and a bunch of other guys, and they thought, well, they didn't think it was a super physical race because the pace was still not as quick as qualifying. You know, there was still 4 or 5 seconds a lap off in race pace. So none of the drivers looked completely spent. So I think Verline might come to regret that, because Giovinazzi got in, qualified under 2 tenths away from Ericsson, and drove really, really well on Saturday, Sunday. So that might be a problem for Wehrlein come the long term. Anyway, that's the end really for me, and the summary of the Australian Grand Prix from my side. I'll be back in China in a couple of weeks' time. See you later.